Hello everybody and welcome to my channel. I am nerdSlayer, an internet video game detective. Amazon Game Studios' newest MMORPG to be, New World, just recently held a preview event in August 2020. And considering we haven't seen a AAA MMO launch since 2014, which was WildStar, the world is desperately in need for a new MMO release. Needless to say, hype has been at an all-time high for any MMO with a pulse. If you haven't been following any MMO news at all, New World is a 3-faction colonial fantasy themed MMO with survival game mechanics, third-person action combat, and boasting the Amazon Lumberyard engine. New World's PvP would feature capturable, buildable, customizable settlements and forts. Although originally the game was set to be a PvP-centric game, with a criminal system and players dropping their loot, the game shifted in 2019 strongly to, as the developers put it, a more PvE-focused experience, which included the removal of losing loot and the criminal system in favor of the 3-faction system. The issue being the game lacked PvE content previously, as it was a PvE-centric title. This resulted in the game being delayed back in July of 2020 to 2021, citing needing more time to work on things. I have been testing New World for 2 years at this point, throughout alpha in 2018, closed beta, and now the most recent preview event in August of 2020. Amazon Game Studios flew me and a few other creators out to their offices in Irvine, California back in July of 2018, where we got to test, talk to developers, and provide feedback. That puts me at easily 100 hours into the game overall, and more dedicated outside of it, though I must admit that the game has changed considerably since I first played it. Though I can't talk about my experiences before the preview event yet, such as my time at the studio due to the NDA, I can talk about the preview event and my impressions so far concerning New World. So that's what I will be doing in this video, starting with the pros and then the cons. I will follow this video with another video detailing what changes I think New World could implement to make the game better come launch, so look forward to that in the future too, as well as more New World coverage on the channel. I wanted to start with the positives concerning New World, and make no mistake, there are definitely some strong positive takeaways from the game. I enjoyed my time playing the game, and I wanted to detail some of the things that I specifically enjoyed. The first visual and most obvious of these are, well, the visuals. New World is a gorgeous looking game, whether through the varied terrain and landscapes, or the colors in the trees or the grass. The contrast is striking in New World, which helps build the atmosphere and immersion in the game. Nighttime is really dark, and not lit up like a Christmas tree. You can actually feel protected by the dark shroud the nighttime creates. While for contrast, the sun can be downright blinding at certain views during the daytime. This contrast also helps contribute to making the various colored mobs in the game stand out, or it even makes the gathering nodes in New World look downright awesome. Each location in the game seems unique and is eye-opening. Sound. To complement the great visuals is great sound design, whether through hearing people gathering resources from afar, the clinking of rock for example, or perhaps the sound of musket fire followed by the clanging of weaponry. The sound in New World alongside the aforementioned great visuals helps create a true sense of wonder when exploring the environment in New World, and makes participating in each action feel distinctive. So I have to just come out and say it, New World has one of my favorite features ever. Nameplates. The nameplates in New World aren't always visible, and they can be seen further with special skills or zooming in with your weapon. Now why does any of this matter? Why does this matter? Why is this significant? Because that means that natural stealth can exist in the game. Yep, no need for a stealth button that literally makes you go invisible. Now you can have natural stealth. You can hide behind a tree, in the marshes of a swamp, or even on top of a temple. Stealth is absolutely a real part of New World, and save for a few MMOs, is one of the only MMOs to feature true stealth. The third-person action combat in New World is certainly a strong suit of the title, boasting the ability to precisely aim at your target with a bow or musket, for example, from afar, or the melee combat, which included dodges, rolls, blocking, and unique abilities. Killing the mobs in New World isn't some menial task. It can actually be challenging and, dare I say, fun. Yeah, just simply doing grinding in New World is actually fun, which really sells the whole idea that you're making your start in some creepy, crazy, magical frontier land. MMO gameplay has been notoriously poor, so New World excelling in this category is a good thing for the market overall. Compared to other MMOs on the market or in production, New World has far more exciting and action-oriented combat, making it one of the most exciting MMOs to play for such enthusiasts. The physics engine. To go alongside the third-person action combat system, we have the physics engine, or the engine itself, Lumberyard. Lumberyard, like no other MMO we have seen so far, has allowed players to have some pretty precise gameplay for a game with a bunch of massive connections of all different kinds of speed and latencies connected. With projectiles whizzing through the air and making contact with walls, shields, the ground, or of course a player, magic maybe isn't as dynamic, focusing more on AoEs more so with its abilities, but to be honest, this is probably as actiony as we've seen for an MMO yet. Where New World is yet again very unique in the combat and physics department is verticality. You have the ability to vault over things while running, but more importantly, you can climb things. You can climb on top of certain things, and not quite to the same level or extent that Conan Exiles allows you to, but nonetheless. But in an MMO, verticality is woefully underexplored. The ability to prop up on a super high pillar and drop hot sticky loads on unsuspecting syndicate members below? That sounds like a party. If only this would have resulted in some friendly fire. My next positive, sandbox feel, is kind of a broad-sounding one, but I want to take the time to unpack it. The sandbox feel is due to a combination of a few systems that incentivize and encourage player interactivity and player grouping. For example, in New World, nearly everything is crafted, so you salvage and break gear down, and then you use that to craft more gear. This lends itself to a rather good working economy in the game, which helps contribute to players wanting to work together. Another aspect of players working together is the settlement system in New World. Unlike typical Capture the Fort style faction-based MMOs, New World allows for players to capture settlements and level them up as well. Factions then compete for control over these settlements through wars, which are 50 versus 50 PvP conflicts, while also fighting for influence before through quests from faction members. Leveling up with a settlement, which is regional, makes the game reward you for playing and sticking to particular areas. To throw in mobs and resources that only appear in certain areas, and unique settlements and monuments in each of these areas, and the game lends itself to feeling that you're actually traversing a real world. And players can pick and choose where they want to live on the map, based on what suits them, their company, and their faction. The final positive I want to discuss concerning New World is a combination of the UI and the quality of life changes present in the game. New World has had a number of very handy features for an MMO. New World has an extensive ping system, almost like what you would expect from a BR shooter. The world map is very detailed and each object is shown, including the settlements and forts, which are easy to find more details on. All of the menus in the game feel responsive, functional, and above all else, aren't too cluttered. New World's UI has improved leaps and bounds. Now that I have covered my main positives concerning New World, here are some of my main negatives with the game thus far. Copy-paste questing. We have to talk about the massive elephant in the room, the questing. New World, when in the beta cycle last year in 2019, was reported as being kind of more akin to a survival-style game than maybe an MMO. Likely in answer to such, AGS or Amazon Game Studios implemented quests and more PvE content into New World. The problem is, these quests seem like an intern designed them in like a 2-hour deadline or something. Both PvE and PvP quests are incredibly repetitive. Run here, collect this 5 times, stand here for a minute. The quest system then resets and basically does the exact same thing in the exact same quest again. PvP quests don't exactly even involve killing other players, which is just really head-scratching. In order to impress the MMO audience in 2020, you're gonna have to do better than 2002 questing. The world was a positive I mentioned earlier. However, I have yet to also acknowledge that New World doesn't take full advantage of this world. There needs to be more ways for players to keep interacting with each other outside of the settlements. This sort of ties in with questing. Give players more reasons to venture out in the world, and give areas you take the effort to flesh out more utility and reasons to be there. The monuments in the game are already there, they're already impressive looking. Why not give us more reasons to be there? Certain zones look and feel awesome, but when you realize it's kind of the same 2 mobs, lifeless stationary NPCs, and little to no uniqueness in the rewards or how you obtain them, and the zones themselves consist of little to no unique gameplay elements, it feels like there's way more that can be added to these areas to flesh them out. Game balance, a problem in New World that becomes apparent after doing any form of PvP, any serious form of gathering, questing, actually, well, just from playing the game normally. Let's start with the combat though, which affects PvP specifically more than PvE. The balance, to put it bluntly, is lacking in New World, and this wouldn't be as big of an issue if this version of the game that I just tested wasn't a preview client that was supposed to be previously launched. In New World, each time you're hit, you're staggered. If players can coordinate properly, they can chain stagger you, and to put in fighting game terms, they can 100-0 you. Think the ice climbers from Super Smash Bros. Melee and their wobble mechanic. If you're caught in the range with a hatchet in particular, which is the weapon of choice for wobbling, you're almost certainly dead. Players don't like to lose control of their characters, especially in extreme scenarios, such as me solo killing a heavy player as a light armor player with 25 light attack swings before he could even react. Now, there's ways to break this, of course, like shields and trying to preemptively dodge, which is easier said than done, or trying to use your teammates as cover. The last actually, even though it sounds like a joke, kind of speaks to my next big point concerning the combat and the PvP in particular, which is kind of my main point here. The game itself, New World, is balanced for 50 versus 50 combat, which is great for sieges, but bad for open world PvP. This is why small-scale PvP by comparison seems so unbalanced and, well, just kind of useless. Either AGS needs to dedicate to adding more open world PvP content, or they need to take a look at balancing combat to account for stagger spam. Balancing around a niche style of gameplay, 50 versus 50, that a good portion of players might not even really experience, negatively affects the PvP balance out in the entirety of the world, not just 50 versus 50. So them focusing on a 50 versus 50 instance is maybe not the best idea for balancing the PvP in the game as a whole. That's not even counting the problem of nearly every player in the game taking a life staff for the massive teleport mobility. And since players get up to 3 weapon slots, why not take it? It became meta in the short preview event time. Another issue in New World that is related to this is sprint doesn't cost stamina. So these two things, including the life staff escape and sprint not costing stamina, means that you're going to spend a lot of your PvP fights simply chasing people down. And sorry, that's just not fun. Without the proper tools to catch players, well, except joining the meta of life staffs, most battles end up just chasing people down until you just eventually just get tired of it. You get tired of chasing them. At the end of the day, the rewards aren't that important anyway. Speaking of which, and speaking of PvP, flagging needs work in New World, specifically PvP flagging. The toggle system currently offers you a paltry 10% bonus for toggling it, and you toggle it when you're doing PvP quests as well. The problem is, outside of questing, why would you even flag in the first place? 10% isn't enough for players to motivate to want to flag and create PvP content in your game. 10% isn't even enough for me to not forget to use my consumables in like Final Fantasy XIV. There needs to be more reasons than just 10% experience to want to flag in New World. Otherwise, the flag system just seems like it's kind of oddly placed. Like, why not just make it a faction PvP in certain zones instead, sort of like Elder Scrolls Online or Guild Wars 2 does it? Why even have the flag system in the first place? I think part of that problem lies in AGS making New World a safer game without the previous criminal system. With New World being way more safe and players having little to no reason to flag anymore, they can instead mass wealth and levels without ever PvPing without any risk. This wouldn't be a problem if there was enough PvE content to sustain the player base. But if players in New World aren't PvPing, what exactly are they doing? New World is either going to need more content in the way of PvE to keep players occupied there, fix or get rid of this flagging system, or just simply speaking, give players more reasons to be out in the world and flag up, period. Currently in New World, capturing a settlement for your company, or more importantly your faction, is a huge key feature of the game. Some would argue it's even the most important feature. The problem with this system is that it's incredibly limited. Outside of having territory to PvP in, it's mainly used for giving you taxes for people within the settlement, using your stations or the markets. But this money is paltry compared to the kind of money you can make from questing, or doing corrupted portals, or even crafting. Settlements just need to have more reasons than just taxes in the settlement to be lucrative for players, companies, and factions to really want to create warfare and conflict over them. And more have had issues with making controlling territory meaningful, and they suffered the consequences from such, which kind of just results in player retention being poor and the loss of players in the open world PvP. What will New World do when factions get tired of fighting over the same settlements that don't really have any point anymore because they already have all the money and the resources they needed? Presumably, they're probably going to move on to the next game. Speaking of which, that kind of brings me to my next point concerning New World, and its problems in PvP. With the switch to a faction-based PvP system, and little to no reason to flag for PvP outside of sieging or questing, New World for a PvP-centric player feels very lacking. Compared to 2020 current market standards, New World lacks severe PvP features. For example, it has no ranked battleground matchmaking, it has no company versus company, guild versus guild systems, it has little to no small-scale PvP, and outside of helping in wars, faction members have little ways of contributing to the war effort overall by actually just PvPing. A sandbox MMO like Albion Online has arena, guild versus guild, alliance versus alliance, PvPvE dungeons, dueling, 1 versus 1 portals, open world dungeons, a flagging system that actually matters, faction PvP, you get my point. While survival games not that different from New World in ways such as Rust or Ark have non-faction based PvP systems, territory control, and asset destruction. Simply put, if 50 versus 50 is New World's main course, it's going to need to be a lot spicier, because there's an overall lack of PvP content quite apparent outside of company versus company sieges. And even if you enjoy those company versus company sieges, you can only do that for so long without getting bored of doing the same thing over and over again. Let's talk about the economy in New World. It's very problematic, as it can be in, well, any MMO. The MMO market having a proper market is key in making players feel more connected and making the world itself feel more like a moving, thriving, and living world. The economy in New World is problematic because at the moment, there is seemingly gross inflation. It's too easy to get high-level resources, and if you quest as a group rather regularly, you can grind together and make considerable sums of money. A content creator and MMO friend of mine, Mighty Teapot, was able to amass 100,000 worth of gold in the short time of the preview event. Money essentially at that point wasn't an issue anymore, and taking the need for money or drive towards money in a world or MMO takes away a lot of the conflict and the struggle in the game, which is content. The time that you spend working with your company mates to be able to afford a house or maybe something more expensive. If it doesn't take more time to do that sort of thing, if it doesn't take time to do much of all of that, it takes away from the content and the pacing in the game. But most importantly, if your MMO's economy doesn't matter, it negatively affects the game overall. Players need goals to be set. They need long-term progression in a MMO. And most importantly, they need scarcity in the game to drive player interactions, conflict, and etc. Features are outdated in 2020. If you put New World's main features down on a feature list, some of those are sure to draw the attention of MMO fans. Third-person action combat, even for 2020, is impressive for an MMO. But many other key features of the game, crafting, PvE, and PvP, aka the 50 versus 50 sieges, are not innovative. In some cases, they lack innovation when compared to much older MMO titles. New World seems to borrow a lot of the ideas from the survival game market, which it was previously dubbed as. In particular, Conan Exiles, which has a corruption system, an invasion system, similar combat, and even a similar map design to New World. While things like sound and visual design in New World might be insanely impressive and rather unique, those aren't necessarily gameplay features. People can only stare at the sky or hear gunfire for so long after all. At some point when a game mimics another game, you start to ask yourself, well, why aren't you playing that game instead? And considering I did test Conan Exiles in early access, it's hard for me to not feel the similarities in the games. The difference being that Conan Exiles in 2020 has way more content, and it had more PvP content at its launch than New World did. And don't even get me started on the whole node system, settlement/fort system that many people are, I think, correctly pointing out the similarities between that and the node system in Ashes of Creation. The problem being, well, the Ashes of Creation system seems like it's far more in-depth. Due to the aforementioned problems such as repetitive questing, lack of dynamic PvP content, and the main features of the game being essentially outdated means that currently speaking New World doesn't have a long shelf life. As it stands, it's hard to see the game if it doesn't get changes or new content surviving past a few months, simply because there just isn't enough emergent gameplay to increase parity, variety, and replayability. The systems in New World, while not outright bad, seem outdated in 2020, especially when compared to market competitors such as Conan Exiles and Ashes of Creation. But don't stop there, you could even go further back, 10 years ago, and there's still games back in 2010 that are still competitive with New World's features. MMOs typically can garner insane interest the first month of a launch of an MMO, typically because the whole fear of missing out. New World being a buy-to-play could alleviate some of these issues, but with other similar titles out there on the market, players could be less willing to stick around and wait it out. I have listed some significant positives in New World, as well as some significant negatives. I can say that I enjoyed my time testing during the most recent preview event in September. Whether or not you deem the positives to outweigh the negatives or vice versa is entirely up to you. What I can say from my perspective is in its current state, New World won't have the success likely expected of it being an Amazon Game Studios project. It has too many large negative issues as it stands. I simply think due to the lack of content and the current state of the game, New World will have issues with longevity and player retention. New World might be in a bit of an identity crisis. But I do believe that the 6 to 7 months period that AGS has with New World, as they push the launch back to 2021, could end up being key in ironing out many of these issues. I think it's very possible that New World can fix some of its serious issues it currently has, as it already has a solid foundation to stand on. With the MMO market starved as it is, lacking innovative features or not, New World can still be an MMO inspired by the survival game market that attracts a wider net of players from both PvP and PvE walks of life. But if Amazon Game Studios is unable to implement the needed changes and respond to feedback properly, New World could very well be featured on a certain series. Whereas New World before might have been likened a lot more to a survival game, I think it's fair to say after playing the most recent preview event, it's becoming more and more like an MMO. And I think that's a key aspect of making the game successful for Amazon Game Studios looking forward. At the end of the day though, these are just my opinions. At the very least, I think we can say Lord of the Rings Online 2 is looking very promising, guys. Thanks for watching.